right, welcome back to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast. This podcast series is a digital variety hour of presentations, webinars, and interviews on topics of interest to residence life and education professionals who work in college and university housing. My name is Paul Brown. I use the pronouns he, him, his. I work here at Roompact, but I also work as an independent speaker and consultant on various topics around housing and residence life and student learning. We've taken a little bit of break from the podcast recently, but we're happy to be back and even more happy to have a guest on with us. It is our 2022 ACUHO-I intern, Patricia Harvel. Patricia, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You know, we're getting into the part of the summer where people are gearing up for professional staff training, student staff training. So I know my schedule's pretty busy, and I know a lot of other folks, it's going to be busy for them as well. But one thing, let's do a little introduction of yourself. I know you're a graduate student at Mississippi State. You're pursuing a degree in ed leadership with a concentration in student affairs. Tell us just a little bit of your background and your passions and all the things that you hope for your future career.
Absolutely. So like Paul said, my name is Patricia Harvel. My pronouns are she, her. And I did my undergrad work at Mississippi State University as well, where I got a bachelor's in economics. While I was there, I worked for housing as an RA and an IA, so an information assistant and a resident advisor. I fell in love with it. I loved helping students. And so when it came time for grad school, I figured I'd apply right back to where I felt like home was. And that's what got me here. And so, like I said, I just have a huge passion for helping students find resources that can help them towards that path of success. And I've always enjoyed living in the residence halls. I lived in the residence halls for all 4 years. And so why not work in one? And so my goals kind of for the future is possibly, after grad school, go into housing somewhere else, get a different feel. And then maybe, work towards hopefully one day, maybe have even a company like Roompact one day or something.
Yeah, well, I love that because part of the reason why, when we were interviewing you and you're going through the ACUHO-I process, something that really stood out to us was kind of your business background, which isn't always something that we see in a lot of the candidates. And it really made you unique, which was one of the things that I think was a really great fit. If you weren't, let's say you weren't working in student affairs or you never encountered it before, what do you think you might be doing right now, job wise or career wise? Like, what would alternate universe Patricia be doing at this moment?
Alternate universe Patricia would probably be wondering why she isn't in student affairs, but I think maybe I would be working in a job with marketing because that was a minor that I had in undergrad and I really enjoyed marketing. So might be in marketing, maybe.
Yeah. That's cool. I probably would be too, actually, to be perfectly honest, because I have that bent in my professional desires and competencies that I'd probably be doing that too. Are there ways that you've been able to use some of that marketing knowledge in housing and residence life? Like, how have you maybe applied some of those undergraduate degree lessons learned into your current roles?
Absolutely. So as we all know, programming, my RAs always come to me for help with flyers, things like that. We run a couple social media accounts with some of our buildings here. And so kind of been able to do that social media marketing through those. Granted, the RAs like to take a little bit of, control on those. And so they'll come to me when they have a question, which is really great. But yeah, I just kind of had those hands-on experience with programming and just different functions across, like with our halls and things.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, the primary reason why we wanted to have you on today is really to talk about the ACUHO-I internship process. Having just gone through the process yourself and now actually in the internship yourself, I think you get a unique perspective. And so, our hope is for any graduate students or even undergraduate students that want to go down this path, what are the things they need to think about? What are the, things to anticipate? So maybe if to start us off to talk about your process, how did you even decide to apply to an ACUHO-I internship? And how did you even learn that was a thing to begin with?
Absolutely. So I had a wonderful supervisor who was very helpful when it came time to think about internships for the summer and things of those sorts. Didn't really know much about NOTA or ACUHO-I, kind of just learned those throughout the process. I think my supervisor one day kind of sat me down and was like, "What are you thinking for summer internships?" And I was like, "I'm not." And so she was like, "Well, what do you want out of there?" And I was like, I think what I want out of an internship is I want to be able kind of to expand my knowledge with housing, because I have been at Mississippi State for a minute. So I kind of wanted something a little different than what I was used to, but I wanted something still dealing with all things student housing. And so she pointed me right in the direction of ACUHO-I. And the minute I kind of just read through the website and what it was about, I was just like, yep, I think this is the right one. It was very confusing at first, but I was glad she was there to kind of lead me in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always good to have a mentor in that process. You know, I went through an ACUHO-I internship myself. I was an ACUHO-I intern in 2000 and I was at University of Alaska Anchorage, and it was one of the most, I think, transformative experiences that I had, especially early on in my career. So I'm glad that you had that mentor on campus to kind of help guide you. You also mentioned NOTA. We haven't talked about NOTA, I think, on this podcast before. NOTA is the ACUHO-I housing equivalent for orientation folks. So if folks want to look at internships, NOTA also does its own process, very similar to ACUHO-I. In fact, I believe they try to link up their dates and things so that they stay consistent, which would be helpful for candidates. But that's kind of another avenue to go down. So great. So you looked into it, you kind of narrowed it down, you figured out, you know, I want to go through this process and things like that. How was the process of actually then doing the application and going through that, all the steps entailed in that? Anything that you'd want to give other people that are going down this path some advice, like make sure you think about this or things of that sort?
Absolutely. So one thing that I kind of was just like, it was a little overwhelming at first, I won't lie. I think applying to anything seems a little overwhelming for everybody, no matter what you're applying to, whether that be like a club or a job or maybe even grad school. But ACUHO-I, I was nervous. I was so nervous. I think the biggest thing was my resume. I wanted to make sure I had time to update that resume, because as we all know, it's very tedious. But I was glad to have that because my resume did not look anything like a student affairs resume. I was used to the one page from the business school. And so when I handed it to my supervisor and was like, "Do you think this is good enough to submit?" She was like, "No." She's like, what is this? And she was like, "When is the last time you've updated this?" And I was like, "It's been a minute." I was like, it's
Been a
been a
little while.
minute. And so it was nice to have somebody. I think that's one of my tips that I have for anybody who's wanting to apply is try to find somebody that's applied to ACUHO-I before. She had went through an ACUHO-I internship right before when she was a grad, before she came here, and she was able to kind of walk me through those steps of what you need on a resume and how to set up your profile. I think a lot of it kind of seems overwhelming, and I think that might be maybe what prevents people from wanting to apply is they kind of get a little overwhelmed. But I think it's important to just take a breath, find that, whether it be a mentor, a supervisor, a friend, or just somebody that works in the department, try to find somebody who's applied to ACUHO-I or maybe something similar. It came in handy because I was like, "Is this good?" And I would hand it to her. Is this good? And I would hand it to her. And so I really appreciated that because when it was 5 o'clock, she did not go home. We sat in her office and worked through everything. I think some important questions to maybe ask yourself is before applying is, like, what are you looking for in an internship? And what kind of school are you wanting to work with? Is it something similar to what you already have? Is it something completely different? I think those are important questions to maybe think about before even setting up your profile, because some of those questions are going to be in that profile of enrollment total, bed capacity total, things like that. I think are important to just keep in mind when you're deciding if you want to apply for an internship.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say from like the employer perspective. So when I think about when we were looking at candidates, I'll underscore what you said about what are your goals? What do you want out of an internship? That's probably the most important thing to me as an employer, because a lot of folks can have similar looking resumes, similar experiences. A lot of folks that have gone, through grad programs or graduate hall director. There's differences between institutions, but you still have the same kind of base of experience. So as an employer, I really want to know, why me? Why this position? Why are you specifically interested in that? Because occasionally we get out from our applicants there's the ability to add some context as to why you're applying for the internship, the specific internship. And the ones that really stood out for me said, I want to work at Roompact because it's a company, or because it's a virtual experience, or because, so very specific things that made me go, oh, you're really interested in ours. Occasionally we'd get some applications that were very general. So I didn't really understand, like, why our position? Are you just saying, oh, I can just click and apply without much effort, so I'm just going to do that? Those candidates, we tended to not elevate towards interviews as fast as some of the other ones who had like a clear, exact kind of stated reason of yours is what we want to go for. I think what's also true though is our position is pretty unique compared to a lot of the other ones. There's no other position that looks like ours. So conferences at one school might be generally similar to conferences at another. So having some specific things in mind is something we cared about a lot. But great things to think about. Once you get in there though, I obviously haven't done it in a long time. What's that like with all the schools you want to contact or contacting you? Like, how do you organize and stay sane in that kind of back and forth once it starts getting moving?
I think it's important to always communicate with the people you're working with. I know a lot of individuals who do apply to ACUHO-I have graduate assistantships, or maybe they're just undergrads that might have jobs or something, but communicate, because it's an intense process. You're going to spend a lot of time interviewing, a lot of time applying. And I think things ran smooth for me because I was able to communicate that with my supervisor. And so she would have it on her calendar, like, oh, this is due for Patricia today, so let me make sure she sent that in. And it was kind of her way of supporting me in that process. So it was one way I stayed organized, was putting it on my work calendar and just communicating with my supervisors and telling them, like, hey, this is the process I'm going through. Like, this is when everything is due. Are you okay with maybe helping me out, hold myself accountable to make sure everything gets turned in on time? And it's overwhelming when you first log in and you see all of those posts. I think when I first logged in, it was like 100, and I was like, this seems like so many. And by the time I had went through that website for the millionth time, but towards the end, it was already like maybe at 300 posts from different schools, and you were just like, well, like, how do I narrow this down? I think once you get into that portal and you're like, okay, so here's all the school, I think it's important just to remember, always check your inbox because maybe it might not be a school you like applied to, but they might reach out to you and want you to apply. Or making sure that you not only check that inbox, but one thing that came in handy for me was make sure the email that you put on your resume is the email that is on your profile, because that is how other people are going to contact you, because not everybody uses the inbox. And so I think it was important for me to remember, make sure you got the right email, because I think in this day and age, we all have about 10 different emails at this point.
So folks would sometimes email you directly through email, rather than the portal, for those that don't know, has its own messaging system inside itself. So you can send messages, again, it's inside, but occasionally people would also email you outside of that. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Man, maybe I'm just such a rule follower, because ACUHO-I is like, you should use the messaging system inside. And I was like, okay, it's a little clunky, but because you want to try to keep it consistent experience for all the candidates, I like made sure I only did it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's just a few that I think maybe might not know how to work it or something. And so, but it's always it was interesting to me to see, like, oh, hey, like, we've seen your profile, apply for this. And so and it wasn't a school that maybe I had thought of or even got to their post yet, because you're going to flip through a couple of pages before you see all of them. I think another thing to keep in mind is like you said earlier, don't send just, generic material to everyone that you apply to. Um, and I think making sure your cover letters are kind of specific to each school that you're applying to and each opportunity you're applying to is super important. Because you don't want to be that person that like sends out a cover letter that's like, oh, I would love to work at Roompact, but you accidentally send it to like a school and not Roompact.
Yeah.
Because I had multiple like cohort members that might have did that on accident. And like,
Yeah.
granted, like you get exhausted, you get tired. And so just make sure to always double check like the things that you're sending and when you're responding to people. I think remembering not to just apply to opportunities just to apply. I think a lot of the times it comes to where you might start the process later and you're like, I just need to apply to a couple schools. I think maybe try not to start that process too late, but is important. But I think also don't just apply because not only are you going to save yourself time, but you're going to save the institution's time. Um, I think that's really important because you don't want to be that person that's like, oh, I applied, but actually, and they're reaching out to you, and then you're just like, oh, I'm just not going to answer them because it wastes their time and it wastes your time, especially if you're just not interested in what they have to offer. And so I think that's one other thing that, I was very lucky to be told previously was, hey, like, don't just apply because I think there is so many posts and you're just overwhelmed that you try to apply as many as possible. Apply to as many as possible, but apply to as many as possible that interest you. And I think that's super important.
Yeah. Yeah. Even as an employer, there were a few in this last go around. I remember, people that had applied, I would communicate back like, please schedule an interview. There were a few times where I didn't hear anything back from some candidates, and I would reply back once, say, hey, please go ahead and schedule an interview. If I didn't hear from anything, I do one follow-up, and then after that, I just let it go and didn't do any other follow-up, only because I have so many other candidates. I don't necessarily need X number. And if you're not going to reply back, well, then at a certain point, I'm not going to keep following up to do that. I'll put that on you. But I did have at least one candidate that applied, I wrote to, and never heard anything from ever again. So hopefully they're having a great internship experience. I don't know what happened there, but
hopefully. I think a lot of the times, especially since this was like my first time with this experience and like being in this portal, like I said, it really helped to have that sort of mentor with my supervisor to kind of walk me through it. I think another thing that's important is just remember to always check it. You might not see any opportunity on there the first day that it pops up and you're able to view any of these posts, but they continue to post like throughout the process. So just always make sure to double check it. I think one thing that I did was I set times to check it. So I'd check it in the morning right before I went to work, and then I check it when I came home. And so it gave me that process to see like, oh, did anybody post last night, or oh, did anybody post today while I was, at work or while I was in class and stuff like that.
That's really great advice because positions do get added later. So even when the system first opens up, like the first day you can go in and take a look, there will be ones that come in a little bit later. Also too, there is a date when first offers can be made, and folks take offers, multiple offers go around and things like that. After the dust settles on that, positions that haven't been filled are put back out into that space. So even if you were to not get in a position in the first round, there might be new opportunities or other ones that you didn't even see before that are there. So staying on top of that and checking it on a regular basis is actually really great advice because that list can change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also important just to remember that one thing that was always told to me throughout the whole entire process was the right opportunity is going to come to you. And at first I was like, so should I not apply to anything? Because that makes no sense. If it's going to come to me, why should I apply? But I think that's not the case. I think you need to apply to what interests you, but say that does happen and you don't get any offers on that first round, somebody could reach out and just say, hey, like your profile stuck out to me, and you go to that internship and you have the best time of your life. You learn absolutely everything you wanted to learn. You reach every goal you had for your internships. So I think it's important to remember, like be proud of the ones that you did apply for, but also be like patient with it and be understanding that, hey, it might not have been the right fit, but there's something else. And so I think that's something that's really cool with the ACUHO-I is that you do have that second chance of finding, you know, like your perfect internship.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the beauty of these kinds of internships. You're with an institution or wherever you're working for at most 3 months, maybe two. And so it's really a great opportunity to learn about a new school, learn about a new functional area, do something you haven't done. And you know what? If it's not ultimately what you want it to be, you're only there for 2 months, right? Like, so even if it's not a perfect fit, at least you learn what you don't like or what you don't want or things like that. And it's without a lot of extra commitment. Like, better to learn that in an internship that's 2 months than a position that you'd potentially hold for years, right? It
Absolutely.
gives you that opportunity to experiment, which is pretty awesome. Well, we started to talk a little bit about getting to that offer stage and
Yeah.
that whole thing. What was that experience like for you? Because I know it can give folks a lot of anxiety about, are they going to offer? Are they not going to offer? What do I do? Do I respond back right away? Do I let it go to voicemail? Do I let it, wait my email to pile up to see which offers I get? Like, how'd you navigate that process?
I think the day of offers, I remember like every grad assistant that worked with me, like we were all stressed. Like we just didn't talk to each other that day. We kind of went to our offices, do what we had to do. And then by the time it came time for like offers to be sent out, I went to my supervisor's office because she was like, hey, like don't answer every call, just let them go to voicemail, like you'll be fine. Right when it came time, my phone started updating. And I was like, they're not going to be able to call. I'm going to cry. Like it was so
That
sad.
pause for a minute. That is the most Patricia Harvel thing to ever happen. So the rest of the folks on this podcast won't know this, but I swear you have this like there's a little technology curse around you or something where it's like just when you don't want that to happen is exactly when it will. But
It always, always.
totally fits, totally fits. Sorry to interrupt you, but go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a curse. And so I remember it updated and all of a sudden I got like a zillion calls right when it turned right back on. And my supervisor was like, do not answer them. And I just remember being so stressed because I didn't know any of the area codes. And so I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I know Starkville's area code, I know my area code, but I had no idea where these were coming from. And so, and I couldn't look at them until they all went to voicemail. And so her thing was, is we went out to lunch and she was like, when we get back from lunch, we'll check them. And I was like, okay, cool. That's fine. Well, some people will text you and like say like, hey, like I called, or like some people email. And then like, I wasn't checking the portal at that point because I was just like, I can't, like I'm too stressed. So like I said, we went to lunch, we came back and there was a lot of offers. And I remember like going through them and then I reached like Roompact's offer and I was just like too scared to even press play on your call. Like, and I remember just like looking at her and like she busted out crying and I busted out crying the minute we started playing it because she had known how much I wanted it, but she had also seen how hard I had worked. And she was just so proud to be able to help me through this process. And I was so proud for her to be able to be there and like see the amount of offers that had came through. And so like it came time, I think you were at like a conference whenever, yeah. And
I think it was
so
ACPA at that time, if I
I
remember.
remember like leaving a voicemail, but I also, she was like, email him just in case. And I was like, okay. So I remember emailing you, but my hands were shaking so bad because I was like, I'm so glad I'm going to accept this. But like, what if now I have to tell everybody like I've already accepted something? And so I think like it was, I was glad to have somebody be like, hey, let's go to lunch and let's take a little bit of a break. But also like, I remember looking at her and being like, okay, I've told these schools no, can you do the rest? Like, because I was so nervous and she was like, no, yeah, I cannot do the rest. But I was just like, I hate telling people like no. And I felt so bad. And so after all of that was done and over with, like you said, over the next couple of days, people still are offering. And so there was still calls coming. And I think, you have such great interviews with people. And that was one thing that I really enjoyed was interviews, which most people would stress about. And I think I stressed about the first couple, but after a while, you kind of get the hang of it. And I hated having to call these people back and telling them no, but I was also, like every time I did email them back or call them back, they would ask like, oh, hey, like, is it okay if we ask who you accepted with? And when I would say Roompact, they were super happy for me. And they were like, that's going to be an awesome opportunity for you. Like, and I think that was one thing that really stuck out to me was like, even if you are saying no to these people and saying, hey, I've already accepted, a lot of them are very supportive over who you've already accepted, even though it's not them. And so I think the whole accepting process was stressful in itself, but I remember being able to just like, it was nice to have that breath and that relaxation of, oh, let's take lunch. And I just remember giving her my phone and being like, do not let me look at it. Because if I look at it, I'm going to stress out, because I was nervous that I wasn't going to get any offers, but it ended up being the opposite, which, like that was awesome. And I was so proud, and so was she. And I was really happy for her to have been there with me, because I had worked previous with her years before. And so she's kind of seen me grow from this RA to now this grad
That's
student. And
awesome.
so it was really nice. And she works at a different university now, but it was really nice to have that kind of moment with each other, like that kind of circle of life moment of where like you've seen me kind of grow and you're here to see me like accept my ACUHO-I internship. So it was really nice. And I hope that everybody had that. Some people might have, but that is my hope for everybody, is that you find that support throughout the process, and that one person, that's make sure somebody's there with you when these calls come through. I think it helps take your mind off of it.
That's great advice. That's great advice. And I'll also tell you too, from the employer side, of course, when we go out and we put offers out into the universe, there's a little bit of pressure on us too, because what if the candidate turns us down? Then we probably have other candidates in mind. But what if by the time the other person tells us no, the other person who might have been waiting for, like it's this little bit of a jockeying for what happens. So it's stressful on the employer part too. That's one of the reasons why whenever I do the offer, I call, because it's the most immediate. I expect that I will go to voicemail. I'd be surprised if I didn't. I leave a voicemail, and then I follow up with an email, which then gives you all the avenues you could want. You could email back, you could call back if you wanted. You don't have to call back. For me as an employer, it's actually how can I get the quickest response back possible, so I know if I need to move on. So you wouldn't have had to call me back if you wanted to say no. I'd just be like, shoot me an email and let me know so I can move on to my next thing.
Absolutely.
So
I think that's super important though to keep in mind. Whether you only get 2 offers or maybe you get 20 offers, I think remember that like time, and everybody's time is important. So like take your time to decide, but also let those schools know that you're taking that time to decide. And I think on the ACUHO-I website it says, like, hey, like you host can offer up to, I think it's like 48 hours for you to decide. But remember that there's somebody else who also applied for that opportunity. And if you're just not real confident in it, like maybe that's opportunities for somebody else, and make sure you communicate with that school or maybe that company that's offered you, and make sure you get back to them in a timely manner. Because at the end of the day, like you don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste their time. And so a lot of people really aren't told that. And so I think like it's super important to keep that in mind, is like, hey, like, oh, I got all these offers. Let me make sure I'm responding to these people in a timely manner.
Yeah. Take some time. Like, I think what you described was perfect, right? In that I'm going to take a lunch break. So that's an hour. We'll let some things roll in. I'll make some decisions, but then I'm also going to follow up right away after that. So it's not that you have to jump on it immediately, but you also don't want it to wait too long either, because that's not fair to other candidates and to other institutions that may be seeking an internship. As a pro tip too, for any employers that might be watching, that's also one of the reasons why it's important to use the ACUHO-I portal, because once you make that offer and when you accept it, I have to go in and make sure that I offer it formally through the portal, because that's what will remove your profile so that you don't get contacted by employers, but also removes our position so that any candidates that are still looking for positions know this isn't open anymore, or this isn't available. That's just a good practice that helps everyone out on that. Well, those are some great tips. I think you really kind of walk through your process, and it's interesting to kind of hear how you navigated that. Is there any tip that we didn't cover, any part of the process that either was a surprise to you or something that you really took to heart as a lesson that you think all folks should know that we didn't touch on today? I want to give you that space to add anything that you may have.
I will add with interviews, when it comes time to interview, like in your accepting interviews and deciding, like people are reaching out to you and saying, hey, set up an interview. make sure you're responding and make sure you do set up those interviews. And like I said, communicate with, people above you, letting them know like, hey, I won't be free during this time because I've set up this interview. But also remember during interviews to be yourself and not just give the answer that you think they want, but also make sure you have questions for them, because as much as it's an interview for you, it's also an interview for them. And so make sure that you have any questions like about any goals that you have, or, maybe what their campus is like, things like that. So make sure you ask questions to the people who are interviewing you, because it's super important so you can get to know them a little bit better.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Well, thanks for joining us today on ResEdChat podcast, Patricia. Excited to see where your future takes you and all the exciting things that you have in store. So until next time, everyone, we'll see you then.
Bye.